You love practicing piano, but you are unsure of how to structure it. How much time should be dedicated to technique or sight reading or ear training, learning a new piece, or maybe mastering an already learned piece? How should I split up all these things and which one should I prioritize? In this video, I want to share with you the way I currently practice, and I recommend you to try this too. Every practice method or strategy has its pros and cons, so if you have your own practice method, please share in the comments so we can all read and learn from each other. In an average 60 minutes of piano practice, my rough guidelines would be to have about 5 minutes of warm-up. I would then have about 10 minutes of sheet music reading. I would then do about 40 minutes of slow and deep practice, and then the last 5 minutes can be for a bit of fun. Let's talk about each section more in depth. In the first 5 minutes, this is the warm-up time. So I might be doing something like scales, or I could be working on things such as Hanon. Usually when we play pieces, we like to kind of express our emotions within the pieces. When I'm doing my 5-minute warm-ups, I usually am pretty unemotional. So it's very kind of left brain, logical thinking. I try to sync up my hands, sync up my brain and my body to make sure everything is very, very precise. So let's say in the Hanon, when I'm not warmed up, I might play something like that. So this is the time that in this warm-up, I try to get everything very, very precise. As you could see, sometimes in exercises like Hanon, I also like to accent certain parts. And the reasoning for that is to try to be as precise and as mathematical as possible, just at least for the warm-up. I then move on to some sheet music reading. So I usually either sight read something that's completely new to me. Sometimes I might even read music that I've learned before. I find that in my 20 years of piano playing, lots of ups and downs, sight reading is something that is so fundamental to a pianist's sort of tool set that I really prioritize it more than ever these days. When you have good sight reading, you learn each new piece much faster. So imagine if you're someone that has good sight reading and you learn 10 pieces rather than 2 pieces in a year. Learning that 10 pieces is then also learning to read another 10 pieces, which then propels you even more to read even more things in the next year. It's a little bit like compound interest. The more you read, the better you get, the faster you churn out pieces, the more you learn, the more fun the whole piano thing becomes. Reading also helps me keep up with my music theory skills. Okay, I look at things like the time signature, the key signatures, the sharps and the flats. So reading music, really, really important. I do this for about 10 minutes. I then move on to 40 minutes, and this is the meat of the practice, which is what I call the slow and deep practice. So this part is usually for the main piece or pieces that I'm working on. Some of you might be working on one piece, some of you might be working on several. I personally recommend working on a few just to keep things interesting. I find that sometimes for some reason, if I'm only working on one piece for a lengthy amount of time, I tend to experience a bit of burnout. And I sometimes wish if I just knew, I would have just included a little bit more in my mix so that it keeps things a bit more fresh and interesting. But you do you. If you're working on, let's say, one piece or song and you're just really loving it and you can go 2 hours with it, just go for it. But if you find your practice is starting to feel a little bit routine, it's not a bad idea to just include a little bit more in that mix. I'm someone that really prioritizes interest. I find that if I work on something that I'm passionate about, I'm more likely to learn something from that experience, and I leave the practice session happy. And our brains are really simple. When we enjoyed something, we release dopamine, and we're just more likely to then come back to the piano for another practice session next time. So interest is really important. Whenever you're practicing piano, please try to include things in there that are actually fun and engaging for you. It's the only way you're going to improve. It's the only thing that will possibly bring you back to the piano. Find things that are interesting for you and practice them. Slow and deep practice is a theme that is talked about quite a lot on this channel. It is where instead of playing through the entire piece fast and making a whole bunch of errors, we're actually doing very, very small sections, maybe 2 measures or 4 measures or 8 measures, but prioritizing executing every single note correctly. It's where every single action is mindful and every single action is conscious. If you ever catch yourself practicing piano and you sort of have this mental blank and you kind of, when you come back into reality, you go, oh, whoa, 20 notes have passed and I don't even really know what 20 notes I just played. that's a sign that we probably need to have just a little bit more mindfulness to our practice. This is where you either need to just slow it down to a speed that you can consciously think about each note, or sometimes I like to do variations to keep things interesting for me, to keep my brain sort of on its toes. So for example, a lot of the times when there are semiquavers, such as, I might play instead something like long, short, long, short. So something like, changing the rhythm often keeps my brain a little bit more on its toes, so I can't just mentally blank out as I'm practicing. In the last 5 minutes, I usually just have a little bit of fun. I would either do some improvising, I would, let's say, give myself some chords and just try to improvise something. So just then I worked with the chords 1, 3, 6, 4. I give myself a chord progression. I try to make a little something up. Sometimes I play through older pieces that I have already mastered. You know, if you want to keep pieces in your hands, you have to practice them. So it's good to retain these pieces that you already learned before, just to spend, a couple minutes, play through them once or twice. And sometimes in the fun section, I also like to try some measures of the piece I'm learning in the deep and slow practice at concert speed. So I would take, let's say, 2 measures, maybe even 1 measure, just to try to play it a little bit faster to see if I can handle it, to see if I can control it. Because at least theoretically, if you do your slow and deep practice well, you should be able to play things a little bit faster because of this deeper understanding of how exactly the hands and fingers should move. It's a very counterintuitive concept. In piano, when you go slow, you're actually able to play fast much quicker sooner. So there you go. This sums up a little bit of what happens in my 60 minutes. There's a bit of warm-up, there's a bit of reading, there's some very slow and deep practice. Not fast, slow and deep practice. And then at the end, just a bit of fun to end things off. How do you practice piano? What's your split? Please let me know in the comments. If you have questions about anything said today, or if you have other piano questions, please let us know as well. Catch you in our next piano tutorial.